So you've probably drafted already, but the work isn't done. There's been some players quietly gaining value the past few days alone. And you want to target these players before they potentially go out there and have a strong week 1 performance. So here are 10 players you need to trade for as soon as possible. And we begin with the rookie out of Seattle, the running back Zack Shanet, who might just go off week 1 as Kenneth Walker is not 100% fully healthy heading into this week. And the Seahawks have the perfect matchup to start this season. They come in as 4.5-point favorites with a nice strong team total against the Rams. And the Rams don't have a defensive line that's that great. Yeah, Aaron Donald is there, but after that, there's no one. And not only is the defensive line shaky, at least there's Aaron Donald there, their linebackers are really shaky because they lost Bobby Wagner, who last year was the #1 graded linebacker in football, according to Pro Football Focus, and he was #2 in overall run stop. So even if the Seahawks offensive line isn't projected to be that great week 1, well, it's not a tough matchup, which means we're getting Charbonnet as a favorite, and he has a nice 26-point team total, which is a great position for any running back. And in similar game environments last year, Seattle starting running backs averaged 14 points on 17 touches per game. And Charbonnet is likely a better athlete and definitely pass catcher than any of the backs that were in Seattle last season. And this can be proven by just looking at his track record. He ended college with a 37 catch season and 11% target share, pretty much borderline elite numbers. And at the NFL Combine this past March, he tested as the 6th most athletic running back out of 43 possible backs. So all that's good news, but of course Kenneth Walker is still there. But when you start to dive deeper on Kenneth Walker, it wasn't all great. Because according to the Action Network, this article here was very helpful. It says Walker is more of a home run hitting back who struggled with short yardage situations. And check this out right here. It said he ranked last out of 46 potential running backs in this metric. We scroll over in yards after contact and stuff rate. So your takeaway is that this was a boom bust runner who relies on big plays, which aren't that reliable in the NFL. Charbonnet comes in as a more reliable back who found more success in short yardage situations. So this is a prime matchup for Charbonnet in week 1. And if he earns the red zone work, he's going to be somebody you want to have on your roster, but there's no way after week 1, if that happens, that your friends are going to trade him. So now is the time to go and buy low. And now is also the time to buy as low as you possibly can on Anthony Richardson, who was like a 10th round pick in fantasy draft. So it's not likely that your friends are really latched onto this guy. Maybe you can go and get him. Because based on this recent Jonathan Taylor news that he'll miss 4 weeks, it's actually good news for the upside of Anthony Richardson. Sure, Taylor being gone might lead to a less efficient offense on the ground, but for the most part, it's going to lead to more carries and red zone work for Richardson. And if you're not familiar, Taylor's going to miss at least 4 games. And I say at least because who knows how long this contract negotiation, if he continues to sit out. Maybe by the time you're watching this, he's traded to the Packers or Dolphins, who had some interest, but now there's less leverage since he's going to miss 4 games no matter what. So now we get Anthony Richardson, this rookie quarterback, named the starter early on. So this is his offense. And last year in college, he had 654 rushing yards. That's 55 rushing yards per game, the ultimate fantasy cheat code. And oh yeah, this fella was the most athletic quarterback in this class, but not only this class. You see, we're talking about and discussing here the most athletic quarterback of all time based on the combined metrics of 278 quarterbacks who tested. He is #1. I mean, he is literally the size of a tight end. He's like borderline 250 pounds. He weighed in at 245 pounds, and he has elite top 1 percentile speed. So nearly 250 pounds running in the low 4.4s. This is a monster out there. And that's going to help him when it comes to just overall rushing yards, but more importantly for mobile quarterbacks, scramble yards. Because these are the yards that are not on design plays when you're just getting pressured and you take off. And Justin Fields last year led the NFL. It led to his breakout season. He had over 700 scramble yards, which helped him finish as a top 5 quarterback. And let's remember that Richardson's head coach now is Shane Steichen, who was the Eagles offensive coordinator in the past and is a big reason why Jalen Hurts broke out. You see, in Hurts' final 4 games as a rookie when he got the starting job and Shane Steichen took over, he ended up putting out there as a starter a 19.3 week, that's 13th overall, 37.8, he was the #1 quarterback that week, over 20 points here, and then finished the season with 17.3. He was a top 18 quarterback or better every single one of these weeks, and in these 4 weeks overall, he was a top 10 QB under Shane Steichen. And then Steichen got an entire offseason to build an offense around Jalen Hurts heading into the 2021 season, and Hurts breaks out. He's the #6 quarterback overall, averaging 21.4 points per game, and oh yeah, nearly 800 rushing yards, and then we know what happened last year, the #1 overall quarterback in fantasy. And now check this stat out. Every quarterback to rush for 700 plus yards in fantasy has finished as a top 10 option since 2019. Now this would break down to 41 rushing yards per game, or basically 3 rushing yards per drive for that quarterback, which seems really doable for Richardson, given the fact that we mentioned he just had 654 yards last year in just 12 college games. Now there is no doubt about it, Richardson was bad as a passer in college. I mean, last year he had a 54% completion percentage as a starting quarterback, which was outside the top 100 quarterbacks in college football. But check out this sneaky stat right here. Anthony Richardson last year in college on play action passing had a 91.3 grade. PFF, that's out of 100. Without play action passing, just 49.9. So defenders are biting on the play action, and look at this last point right here. Shane Steichen's Eagles ranked 8th in the NFL in play action pass rate last year, which was overall 31% of the time. And you could expect Shane Steichen with a full off season now to work with Anthony Richardson to make this a big factor of the offense. So what you're going to see is Anthony Richardson taking off often, pushing towards a 1,000-yard rushing season potentially as a rookie, and a lot of play action passing where he's most efficient. And the good news is week 1, he actually has a pretty solid matchup. Now they're 5-point underdogs. Maybe they don't win this game against the Jaguars, although they are home. But the Jaguars secondary, according to Pro Football Focus, ranks 27th, so borderline a bottom 5 unit to start the season. So based on all the recent news and everything I just said, Richardson is somebody I want to be targeting, and so is this next guy. And that fellow would be Trayon Burks, the Tennessee Titans' second-year receiver, their former first-round pick from last year. And now the reason why I'm pretty excited is because Trayon Burks is making a very fast recovery. He's already returned to the Titans practice this past Monday, so he's going to have over a week, basically 2 weeks to practice before week 1. And what Trayon Burks' injury was an LCL injury, which is normally maybe anywhere from like 6 to 8 weeks to recover from. So maybe he doesn't play week 1, but he's definitely ahead of schedule. And Jeff Mueller on Twitter, a Twitter doctor, he basically points out that the LCL is obviously better than the ACL and the MCL, but you're still going to see more than a few weeks for him to recover, probably a 3 to 6 week range, which is a wide range there. And right now he's on track to come back in that 3-week range. So take advantage of this because your friends probably aren't up to date on all this information or paying close enough attention to the practice reports 2 weeks before the season, and you can maybe buy low on Burks. Now, as a rookie, Burks was limited in his rookie year right away. I mean, October 2nd, less than a month into the season, the guy gets turf toe. This is what Terry McLaurin's dealing with right now. It's potentially something that could last anywhere from like 4 to 8 weeks and hurt a receiver's production. And it's also worth pointing out that Trayon Burks, as a rookie, most rookies, you're getting into a new offense, a new city, the NFL in general, you have to get used to that. But Burks had to get used to playing a new position because in college, he played as a slot wide receiver more than 75% of the time, a big slot receiver. And in the NFL, he had to operate on the outside, as Football Insights points out right here. And despite that, he was still great, averaging 5.4 yards after the catch per reception, despite not being in the middle of the field where there's a lot more room to work with, being on the outside. I mean, it was one of the best out of any rookie not named Christian Watson last year. Now, despite dealing with turf toe and having to play a brand new position, he was still 35th out of every receiver in the league, not just rookies, of course, here, beating man coverage. 43% of his routes, he beat man coverage. And he ended 2022 pretty strongly. Burks had 3 top 20 finishes, despite having Josh Dobbs and Malik Willis as his quarterbacks. So you can expect the newly acquired veteran DeAndre Hopkins to be seeing the most target share here, but he's also going to be taking a lot of attention away from Burks, maybe towards the later end of the season. Burks is healthy, he starts pulling away as the number 1. Now, for what it's worth, if we do see Trayon Burks really ahead of schedule, and comes back in 2 weeks, which is unlikely, but week 1, the matchup against the Saints, this isn't a scary secondary. They're middle of the pack, if not bottom 10 in the NFL on paper to start the year. So let's go from one wide receiver, a young wide receiver, to another guy who just broke out last season. And before we get there, if you're finding this helpful, make sure you hit the subscribe button to see all my content every single day during the year. And that wide receiver is Christian Kirk, who over the last month, it's kind of been a roller coaster based on his preseason usage. And we've talked about this, and we'll talk about it again in a moment. And I've kind of been up and down on it, but the more that we sit with it and what we saw in the 3rd preseason game, there's actually a buy low opportunity here. Now, the reason why Kirk was dropping in drafts the past month and people were concerned was based on the preseason usage with the starters. Kirk was basically only operating as a slot wide receiver, definitely through the first game with the starters. And then in the 3rd game, he got a little bit of run on the outside, but he was only playing 68% of the starter snaps. That's a concern. It was Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones who were staying on the field in 2 wide receiver sets when they brought 2 tight ends on, or just leaving 2 wide receivers on the field. Now, the issue with this is that last year, Christian Kirk played nearly 90% of the overall snaps, and that led to him earning a 26% target share. You can see these were top 25, top 20 metrics in terms of his snap share in the NFL. If that drops to 68%, that's going to lead to a lot less targets, obviously, because he's not on the field as much. But I still don't buy that he's only going to be a slot wide receiver, because he rotated in a little bit, not a lot, a little bit with Zay Jones in the 3rd preseason game with the starters. And last year, he was Trevor Lawrence's number 1 option. Now, of course, Calvin Ridley is there now, but on the outside, Christian Kirk was great last year. Look at this. Passer rating when targeted on the outside, he was 4th in the NFL. Only Tyler Lockett, Stephon Diggs, and T. Higgins were better than Christian Kirk. So why now only use him in the slot? And not only that, but Trevor Lawrence trusted this guy in crucial situations, not Zay Jones. Last year in week 18, when they had to win that game to get into the postseason, and then in their playoff game, Christian Kirk's averaged 12 targets, not just in one game, multiple games, 7 catches and 76 yards. He was the primary receiver that Trevor Lawrence was looking to. And now is the perfect time to go get him, because you can kind of use all this leverage that we said are bad things against your league mates. Say, hey, he's only going to be a slot receiver. I can give you this, this, and this, who are going to be starters on the outside. Even though we just discussed how he could probably still be the outside receiver based on that small sample not meaning a whole lot. And we saw it happen in the 3rd preseason game, him work in more. And week 1, he has a great matchup here. You can see he takes on the Indianapolis Colts, which according to PFF, this is the 31st ranked secondary in the NFL to start the season. They lost some of their starting cornerbacks last year. You can see here the Colts lost Stephon Gilmore and Duke Shelley, so they're going to return a couple other players that weren't nowhere near as good as those guys, and those guys weren't even that great last season in general as a total unit. So there's a good chance that we see week 1 Christian Kirk see his normal role and his team scores 4 or 5 touchdowns in a game, and he goes out there, has a great week, and then you won't be able to buy him. So now's the time to get him before he skyrockets up the ranks. Now the next man up is the Carolina Panthers running back Miles Sanders, who I have been hot on, then cold on based on his ADP rising, then cold on again because he got a groin injury. But right now things are looking up for Sanders. For starters, the Panthers only kept 3 running backs as of right now. This is still the case. They have not signed anybody as of this recording, which means that Miles Sanders' groin injury is probably getting better and it's probably not an issue. So that's the information that we got from the team. But then Miles Sanders himself in a press conference said that he's confident he'll be ready week 1. He basically says that he's ready to go week 1, as you can see right here. And he goes on to talk about how they weren't that great in the preseason, but that the practice tells a different story, the joint practices more specifically. And now if this is the case, you might get the best matchup on the entire season right away week 1 for Miles Sanders, because the game environment might not be the best, just a 39-point total, 40 on some sites, but he's going to be facing the Atlanta Falcons, and the Atlanta Falcons overall defensive line and linebackers are not great. Pro Football Focus has their D-line ranked 27th in the league to start the year. Now they have some names on this D-line. You can see here Calais Campbell, Grady Jarrett, some names that you probably recognize, but these are older players. This is borderline the oldest defensive line in the league, which means they lack a lot of explosiveness. And look, I don't believe that Miles Sanders is like an insanely efficient running back. He's not a Tony Pollard, he's not a Nick Chubb, he's not an Aaron Jones, he's not efficient per touch. I mean, the proof is right here. This is based on last year, your yards per carry and what you were expected to get. Miles Sanders is at the bottom of this list. He was behind the #1 offensive line in football. He was expected to get over 5 yards per attempt, and he came in under this. It was just barely under this, but he still came in under this. He wasn't creating anything on his own. He relied on his offensive line. So like I said, I don't believe he's all that efficient, but it doesn't matter what I believe because they paid the man. And you can see this from what Hayden Wink says. He says fantasy running back hard truths, meaning you don't want to believe these things, but they're true. Miles Sanders is paid as a multi-year starter. He was giving $6 million a year guaranteed, the most of any running back in free agency this offseason, a little bit more and even more than Dalvin Cook. So what this means is you can expect 15 plus touches, potentially closer to 20, all the passing game work and red zone work for Miles Sanders as a 3-down back week 1. And he's going to get his quarterback Bryce Young, the first overall pick in the draft, starting his first ever NFL game, of course, since he's a rookie here, which means they might lean on the run game a little bit more, some play action, which helps open some things up for Miles Sanders, and maybe even some checkdowns. So your angle here in a trade is to hype up Sanders still having an injury. He's on an offense with a rookie, and a lot of things can fall apart. You could even throw in that it looks like Terrace Marshall and DJ Shark are highly questionable, maybe not even going to play. It seems like week 1 is a big potential here. So you can say the offense is going to look horrible to start the year. The offensive line in the preseason wasn't all that great. You can say all these things to try and buy low on Sanders. And speaking of things that you can buy low on, check out this next asset. Now I know a couple thousand of you already have this guy, but the Fantasy Blueprint, if you want to win your league, it's not just for your draft, it's for the entire season, week 1 through 17, to smack around your buddies. Because it's going to have all the tools and analysis you need to do just that. You'll get my rest of season rankings throughout every single week sent to you. You'll get my waiver tools. Those rest of season rankings will help you with trades, whatever it might be. So that's just a small smidge of what you're going to be getting. And it's very simple to acquire. You just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below and follow those 2 simple steps. Now, these are those 2 simple steps that you'll find on there, but look at this right here. It's just $5 for the entire year. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, again, you'll be getting stuff every single day during the week, basically heading into your week matchup to help you win that week. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll just refund this $5, no questions asked. So again, to join the thousands of people already using the blueprint right now for week 1, well, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. Now, the next man up is Cortland Sutton that you need to buy low on, and this might be one that might be tougher to get your friends to trade you him because of the Jerry Jeudy injury, but let's break this down. For starters, as Alex Caruso points out here, the Broncos only kept 4 wide receivers, which is rare. And actually, like shortly after this, they signed Philip Dorsett, a veteran. He's 30 plus years old. He's basically a burner. He's not really a threat to see any type of legitimate snaps. And now let's get back to Jerry Jeudy, because it seemed like early on, okay, hey, maybe he might actually play week 1, but there's a lot of more concerns here. And the concern is stemming from Adam Schefter, one of the most trusted reporters himself, who said this hamstring injury suffered on Thursday. They're hoping to get him back in time. But recently on Adam Schefter's podcast, he actually stated that this might be more closer to a month plus that he'll be out. And Sports MD Analysis on Twitter says this as well. He says players that I think will be ready for week 1, you scroll all the way down. The only guy he says no to is very likely no, Jerry Jeudy, who's probably not going to return until week 3 or 4 is what he's projecting based on his expertise in the medical field. So this means that the Broncos are going to rely on Sutton and the 2nd round rookie Marvin Mims. And Mims is an exciting player, somebody you need to add on your waivers right now if he's available, but he's still a rookie compared to the proven veteran in Sutton. Now, Sutton last year was actually able to earn a 23% target share from Russell Wilson, which was quietly top 25 in the NFL, meaning 23% of the Broncos' targets Sutton was responsible for having. And these targets were pretty useful. The cheat code targets are your red zone and deep targets. He had 39 of those overall. He was top 11 in deep targets, 22nd overall in red zone targets. He was actually top 5 in the NFL in red zone target share, so he was commanding all of the targets on his team in the red zone, and that should only get better now with no Tim Patrick, no KJ Hamler, and oh yeah, no Jerry Jeudy probably to start the year. And now this next stat is probably the craziest one that we can talk about, because Courtland Sutton, the guy that's always been considered this guy who has injury issues since his torn ACL, not reliable. Well, last year he ran 100% of the dropbacks that Russell Wilson was out there for, 501 routes. That's 100% route participation. He was out there running a route every single time. Now Sutton only finishes the wide receiver 40 last year, just 10.6 points per game for a lot of reasons. He had a lot of uncatchable passes because Russell Wilson was inaccurate, and also he only scored 2 touchdowns despite seeing all of those red zone targets, 14 of them. If he gets closer to like just 5 or 6, he was going to finish as easily a top 30 receiver last year. So now with Jeudy out, Sutton's going to project for in the mid 20s to close to a 30% target share week 1, which is usually what you see from a top 15 receiver. And he is going to get potentially the best matchup for him. He'll be at home as a favorite, a nice team total against the Raiders. And the Raiders, according to Pro Football Focus, their secondary is not very good. 30th overall, the 3rd worst secondary on paper to start the season. They were not that great last season, not really any standout overall cornerbacks. They were 2nd worst in terms of efficiency, giving up the most efficient offenses last year. And Sutton was a contributor to this because in his 2 games last year against the Raiders, he posted 16.2 fantasy points and then 13 fantasy points. So pretty simple. Go throw a trade out there for Courtland Sutton as soon as possible. And you also want to buy low on Brian Robinson, who, look, it's likely a coin flip between him and Antonio Gibson, who's going to be the main back in this backfield, but Robinson is definitely the better runner. And this can be proven just based on both of their track records in college. More specifically, Brian Robinson in a much tougher conference in the SEC, playing for Alabama, having all the best defensive linemen face him, and he still put up over 1,300 rushing yards, with his receiving yards being nearly 300. He had like 1,700 total yards, 16 touchdowns. Now, the narrative against Robinson is he doesn't catch passes, just 9 last year and 12 targets, because Gibson's a better pass catcher. He's a former receiver from college. But we were seeing camp reports pretty often like this one you can see on Twitter. Look at this. Robinson has had some impressive catches early on, and Robinson said he never felt like himself last year, which makes sense because he was shot in the preseason and then he returned like 3 weeks later after the season started. So it seems like he was getting a lot more passing game usage and obviously more like himself, feeling 100% this year. It's also worth pointing out that he had 35 catches his final year of college, which is not nothing. Anything over 20 is good for a college back, so we know he can at least catch. And he finds himself in a very favorable matchup week 1, arguably the best for any running back out there. He's a 7-point favorite against the Arizona Cardinals, who come into this week and this season not only as the worst NFL team on paper, but also the worst defensive line on paper. They lost 3 of their biggest starters. You can see J.J. Watt, Zach Allen being a huge one, and then, oh yeah, Marcus Golden. All these guys off the defensive line. This is going to be the worst unit to start the year. And like I said, he's a 7-point favorite. Last year as a rookie, when he wasn't feeling 100%, Robinson as a favorite averaged over 16 opportunities per game. Those opportunities mean his rush attempts and his targets. Now, if there was ever a week for Brian Robinson to go out there and have 20 plus touches, 100 yards and a touchdown, it would be this week in this type of a matchup and to start the year as he's 100% healthy. And then you're never going to be able to get him from your friends because they'll always remember the week 1 performance and anchor on that so strongly, the psychological phenomenon of anchoring. So you need to throw a trade out there before this. And imagine if he actually starts catching more passes, not just a 9 on the season, but maybe like, you know, closer to 30 to 40. The next man up is a veteran, and it's Brandon Cooks, who is somebody that nobody really wanted to draft this season, and that likely won't be the case after week 1 because he's going to go out there in prime time on Sunday Night Football against the Giants, who have the 24th ranked secondary, basically a borderline bottom 10 unit. This is not a tough matchup for Brandon Cooks. The Giants' best cornerback is going to be Adoree Jackson. We would assume that Adoree Jackson is going to be on CeeDee Lamb, which leaves Deonte Banks, a rookie, to play against Brandon Cooks, the crafty veteran. Now, a first-round rookie, he could be good, but again, this is his first game ever. Now, in similar matchups against borderline bottom 10 secondaries, Brandon Cooks in his career averages nearly 14 points per game. Now, people might point to the fact that Cooks is getting older and last year wasn't great. And that's true, but he played on one of the worst offenses in NFL history. Definitely the worst offense last year in the NFL in the Houston Texans, with the quarterback in Davis Mills, who ranked 33rd in accuracy. All of this led to Brandon Cooks seeing a lot less efficient passes. Over 30% of his targets weren't even catchable. But now he joins a borderline top 10 offense in Dallas with a much more efficient quarterback in Dak Prescott out there. And when Brandon Cooks has played in similar offenses in the past, like top 12 to top 10 units, he averages a top 20 fantasy finish for the season. Now, that might not be the case this year, although I do think his ceiling is in that top 15 to top 20 range. But with CeeDee Lamb there, it's probably not likely that he's going to go out week in and week out and be a top 20 receiver, but he'll be close. But then after that, there's not really much here. It's a special teamer in Kevontae Turpin and Michael Gallup, who, yeah, he was coming back from injury last year, but even towards the end of the year when he was fully healthy, did not look all that good. So trade for Cooks before he goes into the primetime night game in the divisional matchup of week 1 that that everybody is going to be watching against the Giants. And then consider another veteran wide receiver, and that's a guy that you want to trade for in Chris Godwin before week 1, because in week 1, he faces the Minnesota Vikings in a game that should be a good game environment. They're 6-point underdogs, the Bucs, so they should be throwing the ball closer to 40 times per game with Baker Mayfield, which is good for the overall targets of Godwin. And this is a good matchup against the Minnesota Vikings, who do rank 25th on paper right now entering the season. And last season, it was not good. Look at this, what Pro Football Focus has right here. They ranked 29th in completion percentage, so gave up the 4th most accurate passes to opposing quarterbacks. They ranked 30th in passing yards, meaning they gave up the 3rd most passing yards, and then 31st in explosive play reception, so the 2nd most explosive plays they allowed. This is not a great secondary. They didn't do a lot this offseason to really try and change that. They will be getting guys back from injury, like Lewis Seen, who was injured as safety last year, so that could change some things, but it's yet to be seen. And Godwin projects for the 7th most wide receiver points as it stands right now, over 17 projected points in the fantasy blueprint. So you want to get him now while his perceived value is so low, before he goes out there and maybe puts up the 17 projected points we have him for this week. And the reason why his perceived value is so low is because of obviously the quarterback, Baker Mayfield. And yeah, Baker is the quarterback, and there was an up and down camp reports for him. Not a lot of people were liking him. Some people, as players, which you would expect, his teammates saying good things, but his only competition was Kyle Trask, not somebody who was known as a middle round quarterback to be a threat ever. But Baker was in tough situations last year, because when he was playing behind the Rams offensive line, it wasn't good. One of the worst units ever. He was pressured at a top 5 rate in the league. So really this just comes down to Baker's play, because that has nothing to do with Chris Godwin's talent. Godwin was still top 10 in wide receiver usage last year and top 25 in efficiency. And now Baker Mayfield might actually be a good fit for Godwin, who plays a big slot receiver often, because Baker loves the slot. Jarvis Landry was a top 24 receiver in 2 seasons with Baker, and Chris Godwin's a better receiver than Landry. And I'll leave you with this about Chris Godwin. He led the NFL in slot receptions last year, so yeah, this could be an interesting combination with the guy who loves the slot receivers in Baker Mayfield. So now these are 10 players who are potential league winners if you can get them before week 1 and their value goes up. So you want to trade for them, but then there's some guys who are just on your waiver wire that maybe not a lot of people are looking at, but you want to. To see who those guys are, well, check out this video right here. And if you made it to the end of this here video, hit the subscribe button. It helps me out, but it'll also allow you to see my future content, so you could always stay updated and schmack around your buddies every week this year.